Hello and welcome into the Fog.net podcast. My name is Michael Swain, the Kansas beat writer for 24/7 Sports. Hope you're doing well. We're coming to you on a Monday afternoon in the middle of June. We're going to talk some Kansas football high school recruiting today. That's what June has become. And the new 12-month-a-year calendar for college sports. June is high school football recruiting. And I don't know of any other college football staffs that had a better Sunday than Lance Leipold and the Jayhawks. KU picks up 5 commitments. Its 2025 class grows from 6 members to 11 over the course of 24 hours. As of right now, I don't think my hands have recovered from all the typing from Sunday, but that's what makes, I think, this time of year really fun and exciting is you get to see these classes unfold in such short spans of time where maybe years ago it kind of happened as more of a trickle effect as guys made their decisions. Nowadays, with these big official visit weekends, things move fast, and that's exactly what happened for KU. So today we'll talk a lot about those 5 guys that did decide to join the class later this June. We'll end up doing a podcast with Kevin Flaherty, just recapping the entire month, but wanted to at least do a little bit of a short podcast for you all today to talk a little bit more about what Kansas is getting. A lot of defensive players to start off. When you look at this weekend for KU, that was always going to be the focus, right? You look at it, there were, I believe, 7 uncommitted players on campus. John Kelly, Kansas's running back commit in the class, was on campus as well. And most of them were on the defensive side of the football. And I think the ball got rolling early in a great way for KU with Adrian Hawley announcing his commitment to the coaching staff and to everyone at a dinner on Friday night. And I think that is something I've pointed out to VIP subscribers on fog.net that was a huge deal. Having someone stand up in front of everybody on the first meal that everyone's kind of all together and saying, hey, I'm committing, that can be really important for momentum. And that proved to be the case as KU picked up more commitments over the course of the weekend. We can probably start off talking about Adrian Hawley getting the ball rolling and what KU is getting in him. Look, he's someone that doesn't have a super sexy offer list, right? Minnesota, Cincinnati are the other 2 power conference offers for him. But this is someone that the football staff locked in on during the spring, and they really like his tape. And they went up to Indiana to go see him. Indiana, on a side note, is an area KU is trying to recruit more often. You look back and Austin Booker, Cole Ballard are 2 guys that have had success from Indiana. And it's not a terrible drive, right? You're looking about 8 hours to Indianapolis. So it's not terrible. So it's within driving distance. And, KU went up there to Michigan City, which is a little closer to Chicago, and got Adrian Hawley. And you look at what he offers on tape, and it's someone I'm really high on. I can't lie. You look at someone that's 6'6", about a 6'10" wingspan, and he has great athleticism coming off the ball. And that's something I think we're going to talk about a bunch in this podcast because there's a few other defensive linemen we'll talk about. It's the fact that you got to be able to get off the ball in Kansas defensive scheme. What made Austin Booker so great was the fact that his first step was so good, and it put offensive tackles in such precarious positions. And that's what I love about what Hawley has is that first step. And then you couple in the fact that he does have great height, great wingspan, right? Again, 6'6" with the 6'10" wingspan, right? That sounds like a basketball player that could go play for Bill Self. So I like that. At defensive end, go recruit basketball players. Go recruit guys that have the athleticism, the movement, have the length to go out and be impact players. And I think Hawley, it's going to take some time, right? He's about 225, 230 pounds right now. I think KU's going to want to get him up probably into that 250 range. That's where Taiwo Onatolu, the defensive ends coach, has said they like their defensive ends to be at. Obviously, someone like Lonnie Phelps is an exception, but that's kind of the range where they want to be at, right? 245 plus. And look, I think Hawley generally fits the billing of kind of that long-term project that KU does like along the defensive line. He just does stuff that you can't really coach. And I love the physicality he plays with. If you're watching on YouTube, right, he trucks a guy on special teams. It's those types of plays that I think are also encouraging, right? That nose for just getting in, physicality. You like to see that in a defensive end. So for me, look, again, the offer list, not super sexy. You look at the 24/7 Sports composite rating, it's not going to stand out to you. But I think in terms of his upside, I think it's tremendous. And look, if you're going to talk about guys that you need a staff to get the most out of, I think the Kansas football staff has shown that they can really develop players. And so that's exactly what Holly is. Another defensive end that committed for KU was Garrett Martin. KU's able to keep that Arizona pipeline running, even though Jordan Peterson is now at Texas A&M. That was a big thing that he established last year, and KU's able to keep it going into one of the better high school football programs in the Phoenix area, in Saguaro. So Garrett Martin's an interesting story here because he's someone that had an early recruitment where it started really early, around his sophomore year. The spring of 2022, it would have been, is when some of this stuff started to happen for him, right? He had a really good spring football there, had a really good sophomore season, over 60 tackles. But then you look at last year for him, had some injuries. Availability was a challenge for him during the year as a result of those injuries. And so you don't put up as much tape right when you're hurt. And for college coaches, that junior year tape is so important for the evaluation process. And for KU, they went down to Arizona in January. They looked at him. They got to meet with him in person. I've spoken to Garrett over the phone before. Like, he's a really good dude. And I think that really is something that you add in the fact that, hey, injury luck maybe wasn't on his side last year, but still someone that has that upside that I think Kansas looks for at the defensive end spot. In terms of the offer list, right? Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, Oregon, Wisconsin. Those are some of the programs that did offer him. And so at times, right, you can get into the whole game of, okay, were offers committable? Were they not? Look, there's a very finite amount of committable offers in college football. And so what matters is, at least in my opinion, do college coaches see the upside in the player to feel like they're worth offering a scholarship? And I think that's the case with Garrett Martin. And I think that's the case with a lot of guys in the class that I think we're going to talk about in just a few minutes. So on the field, right, I love what Garrett Martin brings. He's a guy that just has a great motor, a high effort player. He reminds me a little bit of Hayden Hatcher, just in terms of the intensity in which he pursues the ball, not in terms of his frame or height, right? Garrett's a much taller guy, right? 6'4", 245. He's got a great natural frame to play that strong side defensive end role. But I just love the way he chases after the ball. He's someone that has good chase down speed as well. I think overall explosiveness, something to watch in college. But for KU, you look at recruiting defensive ends last cycle, right? Guys in Deshaun Warner, Takai Sprinkley, two guys that have elite first steps, right? That was something that's so big that shows up on their tape. Well, now you're getting some physicality that room with someone like Garrett Martin, where you look at him play, he's just a physically imposing guy. He does not look like, at this time on tape, he would have been a junior in high school, right? He does not look like a junior in high school. He looks like someone that's been in a college strength conditioning program. So physicality wise, I think you got to feel really good about where he's going to be at arriving in college. And it's going to be about fine tuning the technique. And I think that's just going to be a key for a lot of these guys, right? You get to college, they're going to be taught how KU wants the defensive end position to play. But in terms of physical traits, I really, really like what Garrett Martin brings for KU at that defensive end spot. A fun tidbit for him. He's got some family in Overland Park. So even if, right, Arizona, it's not driving distance, but he does have family in Overland Park. So it's an area that he's comfortable with. And I think that's always something that's always interesting, with some of these guys having more local connections, even if they're not a local recruit. Obviously, maybe someone like Aaron Anderson Kopp, whose dad played at KU. He's been around the program a lot. He lives in Arizona as well. And what do you know? He becomes a Jayhawk as well. So moving on, I think let's get to Brandon Schmelze next. Someone that is from Axtell, Kansas, plays 8-man football. He is someone that I think if he played just 11 on 11 football, I think he'd get a lot more interest and a lot more offers. We'll look at the tape here in a minute, but he's someone that picks KU over offers from North Dakota State, South Dakota State. KU was his first offer. They had him on campus for an unofficial visit during April, and that's when they extended the offer. He's really an interesting prospect because he's 6'2", plays quarterback at his high school, plays kind of this middle defensive back role where he's kind of doing it all on defense. And at KU, he's projected to play at safety. And I like that projection personally. I do like when defensive backs have experience playing quarterback because, in my opinion, it really allows them to have a broader understanding of the full scope of the football field. when you're playing safety and you know what a quarterback is looking for in specific situations, you can better read and predict what that quarterback could want to do. And I think that's a really important thing. Now, as for the tape, look, Brandon Schmelze looked like he's the best player on the field by a long, long margin. And it is kind of tough to project, hey, what level is he at? Where if he's playing right, in Texas or playing, I don't know, for a different school in Kansas, that's a little bit bigger, maybe a little more competitive. You get a better feel for that. But what I like is just how dominant he is in some of these clips, right? Special teams, running the ball back for a touchdown. We're going to see some of the plays as a quarterback. He's a physical runner. He's got some agility to him. I think those are the athletic traits that, at least to me, really stand out. And then you factor in the fact that this is a guy that's a state champion in the long jump. He also has run 100-meter times in the 11.2s, which is not considered elite, but it's good speed. And so he's a good athlete overall and just a guy that you feel like you can teach how to play that safety position. And so 6'2", good physicality, really good athlete, multi-sport background. Like, it checks a lot of boxes when you say that word athlete in college football recruiting. He really does fit that. So I think it's a good addition for KU. I'm bummed he did not get to camp. He is currently recovering from a injury he suffered during track. He was going to camp at some places this summer. The injury obviously doesn't allow him to. I'm personally bummed about that because I would have loved to get to see him in person, just get my own feel for him, who he is as a player. So I'm sure I'll be making a trip up north this fall to go watch him play because I think it's a really exciting addition. And look, another Kansas kid. Lance Leipold has said it a lot, too many times for me to remember how many times, that KU wants to build this program with Kansas kids, and they've recruited them. They spend a lot of time recruiting Kansas kids, and it has not been by a lack of trying that they've not landed as many. And now KU has two, with Juju Marks, the offensive lineman from Olathe South, formerly of St. Thomas Aquinas, and then now Brandon Schmelze. So overall, I think that's a really good addition for KU. And then we can get to the final defensive line addition for KU over the weekend, and that is from Josiah Hammond. This is a prototypical defensive tackle target for KU. And if you're watching on YouTube, you might look at the height and weight, see 6'3", 250. You're thinking defensive tackle. How in the world is that going to happen? Well, KU does like these tweeners, if you want to call them that. Guys that are projected to play kind of defensive end in a three-man front. Those are the types of guys that KU wants to play in their defensive tackle spot in a four-man front. The reason being that, again, athleticism, first step off the ball is so crucial in KU's defense and what they want to do to create pressure on the line of scrimmage and create knockback. So you have to go out and find different players. You can't go find some 330-pound kid who's 6'2" from Florida, because are they going to have that same quick first step to be able to create that knockback? And that's what I love about Josiah Hammond. And we'll get into some of the tape in a little bit, but this is a big recruiting win for Kansas, right? You look at the visit list, and he's someone that has already been to Utah, which has been on a roll recruiting-wise. He's been to Iowa State, and he was set to visit Washington next weekend. And Washington's big recruiting weekend is next weekend. And that shows you that Josiah Hammond was someone the Washington staff wanted to have on campus when they had all their other top targets on campus, right? That's a pretty big indicator of where they had him on their board. And KU was able to get him on board. At first, it didn't seem like he was going to commit. Maybe he was going to take the visit. And then he decides to shut things down and commit to KU late on Sunday afternoon. And so recruiting-wise, like if you want to look at the offer list, right, it's pretty important. And it's a pretty good addition and a really good recruiting win for KU to get this type of player. Now, 6'3", 250, the KU staff's been up to Oklahoma, or down to Oklahoma, I should say, multiple times. Brian Borland has been down there as the area recruiter. Jim Panagos has been by to see him practice. So KU has done its homework with Josiah Hammond, and they've seen him in person, and they think he can add up, 40, 50 pounds, get up to 300 pounds. A player comp that I've given to VIP subscribers on fog.net in our commitment profiles is DJ Withers, someone that was projected to play a three-man front at Kansas when he was recruited by the Les Miles staff. And what happens? He puts on the weight. He continues to maintain his flexibility by doing yoga and becomes a better athlete. And all of a sudden, he could be a multi-year starter for Kansas at defensive tackle. Heck, he could be a 3-year starter for Kansas at defensive tackle. So I think Hammond could have a similar type of trajectory at Kansas. Obviously, a lot will ride on the weight, what he's able to put on. And so we look at the tape, and I think you see him playing with a really good first step, and the chase down speed I think is really good for someone of his size. He plays as a defensive end in a 3-man front at his old high school. He'll be transferring to Union High School in a few weeks when school starts up. And I really like the length that he possesses as well. I don't know his exact wingspan at this point in time, but when you watch him on tape, it does look like he has a really good wingspan. I guess probably in the 6'6" range, which again, you're projecting a 6'3" guy to play defensive tackle, having 6'6" wingspan, even 6'5" would be really solid. And then I just think the natural size that he has, you watch him run around and he just looks big. And for someone that is expected to grow into a defensive tackle, he doesn't look like someone that is going to struggle to put on the requisite weight to be able to play at a place like Kansas. So overall, I'm high on Josiah Hammond. I think it's a really good addition for Kansas. Getting guys like this is important. I think you look at in the past, right? KU brought in someone like Blake Harold, who fits this mold. Blake Harold was 6'4", 245 after his junior season when he camped at KU. Well, going into his redshirt sophomore season at Kansas, Blake Harold's in 290 pounds. So credit to him for putting on the weight. Someone like Graydon Grimes, someone KU projects as a defensive tackle, right? 6'5", about 255, 260. They'll expect him to get up to 300 pounds over the next 2 years. Like, this is the type of player that KU is looking for. And so I think he really checks a lot of boxes for the defensive tackle spot for KU. And so our last guy we're going to get to here is Kenyon Rivera, a really interesting linebacker prospect, someone that has the offer list, but not necessarily the visit list. And again, it gets back to that question of, okay, what talent is there? Because the offer list is quite impressive, right? Michigan, Miami, Texas A&M, all extended him offers. And he plays at a really good program at Buford High School, one of the top high school programs in Georgia. So he's got college coaches going by all the time to see him, and they saw something in him to extend the offer. And in the end, KU gets him on campus for a visit. He gives the staff his commitment. He told me one of the big reasons why he really liked KU was how similar it felt to him like Buford, just in terms of the players and the culture around the program. Obviously, I think that's always a positive sign when you hear guys come from successful high school programs and they talk about how KU makes them feel at home. I always find those things very interesting because you don't always hear that. And you can think of other guys in the past, like a Keaton Quebeca coming from Austin Westlake, one of the top high school football programs in the country, let alone Texas. He talked about how, KU felt, like Westlake. And so I always find those little tidbits interesting. As for the player, Kenyon Rivera, a little north of 6'1", around 200 pounds. He's going to need to put on weight in college. But earlier this spring, he was named the linebacker MVP at the Under Armour Next Camp. Those are really important camps because they get official measurements. You're seeing guys go up against some of the better players in their region. That camp was held in Atlanta, and obviously Georgia is a hotbed for high school football talent. So it's pretty impressive that he's named an MVP at an event like that, where there is a lot of other talent. Now, in terms of what KU's getting, I really like the first step that he brings, right? Common theme here, right? First step. How important is that for what KU wants to add to this defense, right? Athleticism and just pure talent, things that you can't coach. You can coach scheme. You can coach guys to know where to be. You can't coach guys to have a really good first step and have really good physicality. And I really like what Kenyon Rivera brings in that regard. I really like what he does. So you look at him on tape, and he's playing at times as an outside linebacker in a 3-4 defense, where he's asked to be an edge rusher at times. I think back a couple years ago when Tywone Berryhill and Craig Young were both getting sacks in the 2022 season. To me, I see Kenyon Rivera, and I think of that type of role where it's a third down and Brian Bourne wants to send a blitz. Well, yeah, Rivera's got that experience from high school, but he's got that first step and that chase down ability to go and make a play. I think that's really, really impressive. And then obviously the physicality that he tackles with. He's not afraid to get into it with an offensive lineman, as you're going to see if you're watching YouTube right now. Takes on an offensive lineman, extends his arm, has the strength to be able to keep his ground while also tackling the guy. I really like just the physical gifts that Kenyon Rivera has. So for me, I think it's another really good addition. You put someone like Kenyon Rivera with Malachi Curvey. Those are two really good athletes playing linebacker. And generally, it's really hard to project where these guys could land at linebacker because you look at the last couple cycles, Logan Brantley seems like he's going to have a really good Kansas career just based off what we're hearing heading into his redshirt freshman season. Jonathan Kamara is going to be a freak athletically at 6'4", 225 when he enrolls. He's going to be really good. He could play that hawk position, that outside linebacker spot where Craig Young played. But if you told me Malachi Curvey played that spot, I wouldn't be surprised either. I think Kenyon Rivera maybe projects more to maybe that Mike or Will linebacker spot. I'm not sure about the top end speed for him to be able to play at that hawk position. But look, I think he's still a really good player. And if you're projecting him to play that Will or Mike spot, he's got that just savvy feel, it looks like, of someone that can have success there. So overall, I think really 5 good players. And you look at the defensive side of the ball and really reloading on that front 7. And then you add some like Brandon Schmelzley, who I think can have a really good career. I think he can make an impact on special teams. I think he plays safety and provide some pop there as well. So for me, I like the 5 additions. You factor in, the first weekend as well. Kansas landing Joseph Skipworth, Juju Marks from that first weekend. Looking ahead, wide receiver, big question now, right? I think ideally maybe Kansas would like to take 3 wide receivers. No commitments as of Monday at 4:45. I got to always make sure I give the time because in this day and age, you never know when a commitment can happen. So as of right now, no commitments to wide receiver. That's a position to watch. Really interested to see what happens at cornerback as well. LaRue Zamorano took his official visit to KU this past weekend. He did not commit. He's from Southern California. He also has a visit set up with either Washington or USC for this weekend, so we'll have to see what happens with him. But looking ahead, this next week is going to be the final week of summer visits. So KU's going to have some midweek visitors, guys arriving, I believe, on Wednesday, and then another crop of guys arriving on Friday. And for KU, probably hoping that they can have somewhere close to the mid to high teens by the mid-July mark when guys have all kind of made their decisions. Those high school recruits start focusing on their senior seasons. KU starts focusing on its 2024 season. And if KU can get up to that number, right, that's a pretty good spot to be in where going into the fall, KU's not having to look for a lot of late risers, late bloomers, guys that they need to find to fill the class. So those are just my thoughts on what's going on with Kansas football recruiting at the moment. Obviously, we'll be back with another podcast in, I'd say, about 2 weeks, I'd say. We'll see what the dust settles on this week of visits coming up. And then Kevin and I will dive into everything going on with Kansas football recruiting, what the 2025 recruiting class is looking like at that point in time. But as always, thank you so much for listening to the Fog.net podcast. If you're watching on YouTube as well, make sure you're liking the video, subscribing to the channel. Always goes a long way in helping us reach more new people. And look, if you're not a VIP on Fog.net, something you should probably check out. We're posting lots of updates about guys we're hearing could visit, guys I feel good about committing to Kansas down the road. Obviously, basketball recruiting. June, right? Really busy for football recruiting. July with the live periods could be really busy for basketball recruiting. A lot going on with some 5-star visitors headed to campus this weekend, and then also some guys KU's firmly in the mix with as well. So good time to sign up for VIP. Thank you as always for listening to the Fog.net podcast. We will talk to you all again soon.